Good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm Starlett Massey, the founding shareholder of Massey Law Group here in St. Petersburg, Florida. And we are here today for 1 hour CLE on Florida Bar Approved Tech Credit with our guest of honor, one of my best friends, Masheika Allgood, founder of AIIAI Consulting. Masheika is an AI ethicist. She has worked in tech since 2015, following her career here as a Florida lawyer. And she has worked at one of the world's largest AI technology companies. And we're here today to talk about the uh, interactions, fears, hopes that arise when you connect AI and the law, with today's series focusing for attorneys on how our clients are using and impacted by AI. Thanks, Masheika, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing, and I will move that to speaker only and put you up in the corner. Don't judge me. I'm not putting baby in a
Never.
corner. Not putting baby in a corner. Just just putting you up there. So yes, thank you everyone for coming. This is a follow-on to our first session, and we're gonna start with a discussion of AI and its impact on our clients. So let's get started. So let's start today's session with a level set on AI technology and the fact that it's impacting all of our lives daily. No matter who you are, no matter your lifestyle, it's literally in every area of society. It's on our phones, TVs, appliances, so it's on our hardware. It's being used in banking, real estate, financial services, immigration, unemployment, social services, construction, architecture, policing, credit, human resources, education, healthcare. It is literally everywhere, even down to how you get your food and toilet tissue. All of the systems that impact your day-to-day life and your future are increasingly incorporating AI technology. And that impact is being driven by state, corporate, or individual actors, some of which are our clients. So let's take a look at some of the ways that our clients are using AI technology. So just a couple sample cases of the use of AI, looking at corporations, government, and individuals. So I'll go through and kind of just give a brief overview of some of these use cases. So corporations are probably the fastest adopters for AI, but they're still not completely all in, right? There are some corporations who are spending massive amounts of money and see their future closely tied to AI, but a lot of people are trying to understand implications. And so the adoption is not as fast as the tech community would like. Um, the corporations are using AI very largely in customer service chatbots, especially on the websites, for performance marketing. So, when you're placing ads, you may, within your company, create the content, but where the ad is placed on the websites is often largely driven by AI now, or that's the push with the vendors. But they will also assist you with AI content for your marketing as well. Um, Corporations are using AI for communications, both internal and external, as well as producing content for marketing and for other purposes. They're using it for cybersecurity and fraud detection and management, as well as inventory management, right? Supply chain types of things and logistics. So, how using AI and robotics to move products within a warehouse, that kind of thing. The government, both national and state governments, have largely been the slowest adopters of AI technology. The one place where they've been pretty quick and pretty universal in their adoption is around policing. But outside of that, the use cases are largely proof of concept. So there are a couple that I keyed in on that I thought were pretty awesome. Using AI for disaster prevention, right? So I'm in California. We have wildfires. They're starting to roll out tools to use AI to help determine where a like where a wildfire is starting and then where it will go. So that's really impactful for us. Disaster preparation. There are governments, state and local governments that are using AI to try to determine within my purview what parts of my district or state are likely to have certain kinds of disasters so that I can, make sure resources are available or start pre-planning for those issues. And then another example from California, San Jose, a city below mine, 10 minutes below mine, is using, we have this 311, which is non-emergency police number. Well, they've automated an app using, or they use an app which uses chatbot technology. And it's basically to help them like in their, um, to route information that they get from citizens. So instead of having always to use the phone and have people involved, they've created an app which has chat GP or chat bot technology that allows them to get information from their citizens and then route it to the proper places. And then individuals. Individuals are largely using interfacing with AI around Chat GPT, but there are also some really cool apps that are being built to help people do what people do. So there's an app that's being built to help people buy and sell real estate, and it's kind of like a cross between. It uses some natural language processing technology, so that I can write what I want and who I am and what my requirements are in plain English, and then it can pull from that and understand like what are the individual things that I like, so I don't have to put it in a form. But then it's also like a recommendation engine because then it goes out based on your criteria and finds places that it thinks might, meet your needs and gives them back to you. So
Perhaps
uh,
we should have invited our realtor friends to this discussion.
perhaps, perhaps. And then also drafting assistance. So these other use cases are largely being driven by Chat GPT now. So like helping people draft letters or reports, they're using that technology for that. Either an AI technology that company provides, or they're just on their own using AI tools like Chat GPT. People have been using it as an intern or kind of coworker. So like giving it assignments essentially, and then getting that work back. Also for transcription and translation, we we tried to get the auto populated subtitles from session one out of YouTube. It was a disaster. And so there are AI technologies that do really well with transcription. And we've all been using Google Translate. It's the only reason I made it through Japan for a month without my wife. She translates, but when she wasn't around, it was me and Google, right? And then programming assistance. There's a lot that you can do with these technologies around telling it in plain language what you want your program to do and it producing code that will do that. Or, I produced code, can you bug check it for me? So people use it for that as well.
So they're
Um,
they're literally uploading their code to the AI program and then getting it back debugged.
yes, yes. And there's also, I think it might have been Microsoft bought GitHub, which was an open source code platform, and then created a code copilot AI with the goal of the AI helping you go through and code. There were some issues with that around, you didn't ask people if they wanted their code used that way, but we're focusing on the positive to start. Uh, last session, we discussed the risk of, the general risk around using AI applications. But these are some, pretty good examples, right, of ways that our clients are using AI to positively impact their businesses, customers, and people's quality of life. But we do need to talk about what happens when it doesn't work out necessarily positively. Because often when AI goes wrong, it goes really wrong, and the impact can be widespread and pretty devastating. So let's take a look at some of the examples of how clients have used AI and it did not work out the way they intended. So let's start in employment. All of these are news articles. They'll be clickable when I send out the presentation, but this is just the headline from each of them. So in employment, Amazon specifically and gig companies more broadly use opaque and like black box algorithms to measure employee performance increasingly using those same algorithms to fire employees. And when an algorithm fires you, there's no recourse, there's no explanation, there's no person you can talk to explain why your performance was lacking. In healthcare, the developers of this kidney transplant algorithm were looking at the data and realized that there was a significant gap between the data of Black people who presented to the hospital and white people who presented. And so they added 16 points to Black people's base score just to even out the data. There's been no study indicating that race has any bearing on the severity of kidney disease. The scoring wasn't medically indicated. It was just an effort to make the math easier for the developers. But in reality, that translated to Black people needing to be significantly sicker before medical intervention was warranted. The article on the coming war on hidden algorithms, there's a confluence of credit scoring algorithms, algorithms that determine your eligibility for services like Medicare and things of that nature, housing, employment, that kind of all work in concert and feed off of each other to limit your opportunities after you've fallen on hard times. So basically, once one of the algorithms pick up that you're doing poorly, then the other ones just kind of feed into that, and they all just kind of work in concert to keep you trapped in your poverty. The heat listed. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I have so many questions, but I think maybe because there's so much material today, I'm gonna ask that we do come back if we have time to, I think a lot of people feel like the adoption of AI machines will neutralize, historical discrepancies in the healthcare provided to Black and brown people versus white. But we don't have a lot of time. But I just want to point out that what you're explaining is very concerning. It's not neutralizing the playing field. If you have to add 16 points to help the machine do the math and use the algorithm it's been taught, we have an inherent problem.
Yeah, this is part of what we discussed last session was the social issues that underlie the issues, the bias and the disparate treatment that we have in society, and the fact that you can't just overlay that with tech and expect it to just automatically get better. But we can get deeper into that afterwards. Yeah, you're right.
Thanks. I'll let you move on. I just
Yeah. No, no, completely fair, completely fair. This article on law enforcement, it's the article, it was an investigative study called Heat Listed, and it talks about this gentleman called named Robert McDaniel. And basically, he was a real life example of the Minority Report movie. This gentleman was targeted by an AI system that tagged him as either a future victim or a perpetrator of violence based on where he lived and who he knew, not his background. He didn't have a violent criminal history, but he lived in a place where there were a lot of people who engaged in violence, and he knew a lot of people who had engaged in violence. And based on those two issues, the AI system tagged him as highly likely to be involved in violence on one side or the other. Well, the police were very clear that they assumed that that meant he would be the perpetrator. And so he ended up enduring years of extreme police harassment. But this was 2017 when this first started. And no one understood what an algorithm was, especially not in his community. And so the police constantly coming and talking to him, coming to his job, coming to his house in a community where the police only talk to you if you've done wrong, put him in a position where people thought he was a snitch. And so he ended up getting shot twice by people in his community because of the harassment. So it basically became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The police came to him and said, "You will likely be involved in violence." And then their actions uh, precipitated him being involved in violence. Um, in education, this is actually a Florida case that Starlett brought to my attention a couple years back around using predictive policing technology to determine if children would end up in jail, and then the applicate like the way that it was used by this police department was, well, then we need to, take measures against you and basically run you out of the county or just destroy your lives. So all of our efforts to break the school to prison pipeline, and this application was looking to expand it and permanently embed it into the educational structure. Uh, in automotive, in 2021, the National Highway Transport Safety Administration, NHTSA, opened an investigation saying that it had identified 11 crashes in the last 3 years, well, 2.5 years, in which Teslas had encountered first responder scenes and subsequently struck one or more of the vehicles involved with those scenes. So emergency vehicles stopped on the side of the road, and the Teslas just on autopilot just straight ran into them. Last month, June 2023, the NTHSA upgraded their investigation from an investigation to an engineering analysis. And that's important because an engineering analysis is a precursor to a recall. So it took the next step of, I guess, severity in the investigation. And just as an overarching statement, Tesla's autopilot has been involved in 736 crashes with 17 fatalities so far. And then I list a couple of documentaries that speak on specific issues. Coded Bias speaks to the negative impact of facial recognition technology. They highlight a group of renters in an apartment where their landlord decided he wanted to put facial recognition technology for people to come in and out of their homes. But facial recognition technology is historically very, very bad at dark-skinned people. And this apartment complex was in a Black neighborhood. And so you've got people who are paying rent who are essentially locked out of their apartments because the locks don't understand who they are. And then finally, The Social Dilemma. Lots of you may have seen that on Netflix, but it talks about the impact of social media on society. But we never really, when we talk about social media, we don't often think of search results. But it delves into the fact that the Charleston church shooter was radicalized by Google. And so the idea is I want to use this technology to keep you on my website so that we get a certain amount of income, but the unintended consequences is that you can end up radicalizing people and causing other people their lives.
Like many people here, I saw that movie when it came out, and my question to you is, it seemed pretty obvious then and remains obvious to me that there should be some kind of regulation of AI that is directing people to certain content based on common searches. Going back to your first presentation, when more neural power is given to some component of AI or some question because it's asked frequently, and people are becoming radicalized, as that documentary described, are we doing anything to regulate the way AI is pushing search results?
So part of that, and I actually have this slide in here, but we discussed a little bit about Section 230, which basically says that the platform providers can't be held liable for what happens with the content on their platforms. And social media companies have basically hidden behind that, and it's just been a shield for them. And so outside of that, there's no regulation on the rules on how you can push people towards content. Like there's been a lot of discussion about dark patterns and like using manipulation to make people push certain buttons. But as far as like the algorithm pushing you in a certain direction, we don't have regulation on that at the moment. It comes down to personal responsibility. But we, as a nation, as states, have not regulated this area.
Okay, thanks.
So it's easy to look at those examples that I just discussed and start identifying specific areas where things went off the rails. And that's definitely a valuable exercise, but many of the problems with AI are bigger than the implementation process. They go directly to the fundamentals of automation and the impact of automation in society. So, first, the ethics of labor automation, right? What kinds of jobs are we comfortable as a society with being automated? When in the 50s, when the idea of AI was we're going to automate jobs that are really hard, really dangerous, that humans don't want to do. Like that was the goal. But in the last 70 or so years, we've realized that those kinds of jobs are very hard to automate. It's a lot easier to automate creative jobs. And so when you see the first tranche of automation was more like what we intended, but this last group in the last 5 or 10 years is coming after creatives. And so ChatGPT, the way that it was trained, it took a lot of people's, creative work and just kind of sucked it up into the machine, and you can recreate their work. DALI is a visual, an image based technology that does basically the same thing. It works the same as ChatGPT, but it uses images instead of words. And so you see now that there is pushback. Part of the actor strike and part of the writer strike, one of the things they're discussing is AI and the use of AI by the um, the directors, right? Can't you can't use a deep fake of me without paying me as if you paid me as a person, or you can't use Chat GPT to generate a script and then start just paying us to edit that script. Like these creative endeavors, are these the things that we want AI to automate just because that's what the tech companies have the best or the most ability to automate, right? Um,
I mean,
the
that kind
idea,
of makes sense, right? You don't need accuracy to produce a creative product. We don't have the same risk of error, the lack of, you know, constant learning feedback. It doesn't have to be accurate. It just has to be enough to sell. Sorry,
exactly.
I'm sounding way too cynical for this early in the morning.
Well, I mean, it's not cynical. It's risk mitigation, right? Like if I'm being hammered because my stuff is not accurate, let me find applications where accuracy is not so much of a problem. So these are
Right.
business decisions. Like it's not unreasonable and it's not cynical. This is just the nature of business. But the nature of business has limits based on what society is comfortable with. And so, what are the ethics of automating away people's jobs? Like, what kinds of jobs are we comfortable with? And to what extent do we want jobs to be automated away? What does that do to society, right? Um, Automated decision making has a certain level of finality because of the speed in which it happens, the curtain behind which it happens a lot of times, people's inability or unwillingness to override an AI system. They don't think they're smarter than the system. They don't want to get hammered if they make a decision, and people are like, why didn't you go with the AI? So a lot of decisions that are made by AI are essentially final at that time. It's hard to get redress. It's hard to fix the data. So that's not an implementation specific issue. That's an issue of making automated decisions. The inherent bias that we went pretty deep into in the first discussion, but that you raise here, there are biases within our social record. It is part of who we've been as societies over time. And AI is just um, we're feeding AI that data, our social record. That bias is inherent into that data in ways that we don't necessarily even understand. So it's not like we can give it clean data without biases. We don't even understand how deep and in what form those biases are. So those biases that are inherent in our societies are inherent in the record we provide our AI systems.
I think,
And
sorry to interrupt, but I think a very easy to digest example of that, which hopefully people have already heard of, is if your credit score or credit worthiness for tenancy is going to be based on things like your address. Well, if your address has a zip code that is in a historically Black community or historically underprivileged community, which may be because back in the days of redlining, that's where you were placed, that bias carries forward over decades. The AI is just using the data available. The
yeah,
algorithm has to be taught to fix it if that's the result we want as a society.
But here's the problem. Can it be? Like
I don't know.
that's the
I
issue.
don't
Like
know.
for all of for all of these individual use cases, we can't assume that we can teach away this bias. And what we found is in a lot of cases we can't. Like the algorithm will find when Amazon had come out with a hiring algorithm, and it was heavily biasing towards men, presenting jobs to men because Amazon had mainly hired men, and it was like I need to hire people who look like the people who were successful in my data set. So they were like, oh, well, we'll just take out gender and any reference to gender, and it should even itself out. And what it found was the algorithm started looking at different values. We call them proxy values to determine if you were male or female, because male or female was the thing that it had realized was the number one determinant of if you should get a job or not. So then it started looking at what college did you go to? Did you play women's sports or men's sports? Were you in a sorority or a fraternity? It found different values that still gave it the signal it was looking for. So it's not so easy to say, we'll train it away. It's so inherent in our data that we don't exactly necessarily know how to do that. This article that I'll link here talks about responsibility gaps. Like if I've got a normal system, this one talks about it in self-driving cars. If I've got a system for QAing, a an automated process, but then I drop an AI system into there, where does the AI have responsibilities versus people? And there's a gray area, like whenever you drop in an AI system of who is responsible for what. And a lot of times there's no conversation about it. It's like, oh, it'll work the same way. Well, it's not going to work the same way because this my decision? Is this the machine's decision? And the conversation often doesn't happen. And then privacy and data security, we talked a bit about the issue of, anything that you feed an AI system is available to be retrained, which means that it's available to come out of that system, which is a real problem with natural language processing. And the idea that if I am these videos that we're putting online, what is the level of privacy if somebody decides to go and make a deep fake of us based on these videos? Who do I see?
But isn't so let's say we post this video and somebody takes the images of you or I, puts together a deep fake. That's illegal, right?
Illegal in what sense? What law?
I'm asking. I mean, who do we sue? How do we know? Can we even
What
find the
law?
defendant? I don't.
Uh,
How
what
do you
law?
protect yourself?
These are these issues. They're broader than implementation. We've not created a structure around this technology that considers privacy, data security. Europe is moving a lot quicker in that realm, but we're talking in the US. And in the US, we've not created specific laws around these kinds of behaviors. And so if someone deep fakes me and it goes viral, I'm not going to get paid for it. And there's no one I can sue. And then finally, the one thing that we just have not talked about is the environmental impact of AI. And you there's a certain amount of water usage that is required for an AI system. Like you have to cool the data centers, right? Because they get really hot when they're pumping out all of this um, all this math. But they use this special like hyper pure water that they feed into the data center. And there's a process of taking regular water and tap water and whatever water they have, and then going through this processing process in order to make it like this hyper pure water. Well, that processing process loses a lot of water. And then you make the hyper pure water, you run it through, and then after it gets hot, you push it back into whatever body of water. Well, in the Finger Lakes region up in New York, they were had a Bitcoin mining, and it was right on the edge of one of these beautiful, pristine lakes. And they kept pushing that data center water back into the lake, and it was raising the temperature of the lake, and the fish were dying, and the birds were going away. And so they sued up there. But this is the US, right? Everyone is not going to have the same kind of resources. So if I'm not in the pristine Finger Lakes, I'm in a more regular lake that people just use for their day to day lives. Do I have that opportunity to sue for what's happening to the water usage in my community? And that's not speaking to the amount of carbon emissions that go out every time someone just asks ChatGPT to write them a joke. Like the amount of energy that is used every time you hit these technologies, you're not seeing it as a pop up on your screen as a cost, but it's costing all of us, and that it's impacting, what's happening to our environment in the world.
And I
So
haven't heard any discussion on that despite trying to stay abreast. It is something we need to at least be aware of. And who knows if one of us will have the opportunity to represent a client who's been directly harmed by virtue of their ownership of real estate near, now a heated body of water. It's something to be aware of.
it is, and there has been some effort to kind of push environmentalists and technologists together so they can start having these conversations. But I don't know that it's been overly successful, right? So now I want to talk a little bit about, what happens. Like we said, there aren't a lot of rules, right? But there are some rules around some uses of technology. So let's look at the two major regulatory bodies and how they've started implementing penalties against certain uses of AI, deceptive practices for the most part. So, yeah, fines, right? So that's the number one factor. So in 2019, the FTC fined Facebook $5 billion for their use of data, improper use of data. But when you look at it in context, Facebook made $70 billion worth of revenue that same year. And the next year, they made $85 billion worth of revenue. So are the fines really working? Um, the SEC last year took it a different step. They fined this company called App Annie and their CEO for deceptive conduct and material representations. And why this is important is because they fined the CEO. Like they fined the company like 1.5 billion, but then they required the CEO to pay $300,000 of that, right? Like, they made an officer directly liable for the conduct of his company. So moving to a different realm, like, okay, so finding a company in and of itself may not be sufficient, but maybe if we make it hurt your pockets, maybe that'll help. And then there's this brand new tool called disgorgement. Not new, it's an equitable tool, but it's being used in a new way. So let's talk a little bit about this because this is the one that's most exciting. Um, in 2020, the SEC decided Lou v. SEC, or it was decided by the Supreme Court. And basically, it said that there is a right, an ability for the SEC to sue for equitable disgorgement of net profits. So basically, you've misrepresented in some way, and you got benefit from that. And so equitable disgorgement means you need to pay out your benefit for that misrepresentation. You need to pay that to the other side or as a fine, right? Out of your net profits. So that's how the SAC has used it. But the FTC is the more prolific user and they use it in a very interesting way. So in 2019, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which this group was on Facebook, they had you take all these cool little tests and stuff to figure out, are you a Hufflepuff or, which friends character is most like you. And it seemed innocuous. And come to find out they were collecting it and they were selling it and people were using it to target voters in different elections across the world. So it was a huge scandal. And it was the first time FTC decided, I want to use this new tool we have. It's always been there, but we want to use it in a different way. We want disgorgement, but instead of money, we want you to delete the algorithms that were built on the data that you should not have had. And they gave Cambridge Analytica 10 days, like delete everything, right? They used that again in 2021 against Everbomb, which was they were a photo sharing app, a photo gallery app that lets you sync your photos to the cloud. And they told people you can opt out of facial recognition. We have it, but you can opt out. But under the covers, they had the settings set to allow facial recognition, and that setting could not be changed in the app. Then they used the photos that customers uploaded to develop facial recognition algorithms and technology that they then sold to enterprise customers. So complete deception. Like, hey, here's this cool app to help you upload your photos. We won't do anything with it. and then, and then
That's a
blatantly,
pretty clear 10b-5
it was
violation if
it was
I've ever heard of
bad.
one.
It was bad. So for them, the FTC said you need to delete these algorithms within 90 days. And then Weight Watchers had they basically were taking information from children without consent. And they were told to delete the algorithms within 90 days and pay a $1.5 million penalty. And then I put OpenAI here. I can't say that they'll be doing disgorgement, but it's on the table if they lose. But in this year, the FTC opened an investigation into whether OpenAI, which is the company that created ChatGPT, whether they engaged in unfair or deceptive privacy or data security practices, or engaged in unfair or deceptive practices relating to risk of harm to consumers. Basically, they're trying to determine whether the ChatGPT has harmed consumers through its collection of data, and also through its publication of false information on individuals. So it'll make up a story about someone if it doesn't have data on them. And it did that for an attorney, a law professor, and said that he had raped someone back in the day. That was the story. Like when they asked about his background, that's what it said. So like
Really?
it can be pretty horrific.
So
So
did
like
who did he sue? Did he sue? Does he have a defamation case?
this
There's no
this
malice. This is wild.
this is what prompted the FTC investigation. This, along with that someone asked information for payment information out of ChatGPT, and it gave it. It gave like people's financial information. So obviously everything it's whack-a-mole. Like, oh yeah, but we fixed it. But the FTC wants to understand the entire process. Like, how were you considering this stuff before you released your technology? Did you have stuff in place? Right. Um, so why is this disgorgement remedy so concerning for those of us who have clients who may be implementing AI? It's because training and running these algorithms is prohibitively expensive. Like if you want to run your own algorithm, it costs a lot of money and cloud credits that you're paying to one of these major cloud vendors to train or run this algorithm. Um, and then if you're asked to disgorge, which is I need to figure out what algorithms are using this offending data. The complexity, the data complexity makes it hard to determine which algorithms have to be deleted. Because I think I told you in a pre-call about Facebook, they had something leak. Go ahead. Yeah,
The leak, right? That like
yeah,
they were yeah, they were said that the internal memo was leaked, and he was explaining that once data goes into their system, it's like a drop of water into an ocean. You can't necessarily retrieve it from one specific place. It becomes stored in all of the algorithms. Everything is intertwined like any human neural network, right? You
yeah,
can't just eliminate a fact
yeah. He was
and
saying you
retrain an
cannot.
algorithm.
Right. He was saying you cannot, we cannot tell you where this data has gone. Like there's nothing we can do. So if you have to delete the algorithms that have the offending data and you don't have an understanding of where that data is, do you have to delete all your algorithms? Like this is a real concern. And so while regulatory action is a concern and these particular things are of issue, we also need to consider what kinds of cases we're likely to face in civil courts. And this is part of what we're talking about. How do you sue? And honestly, there is no blueprint. People are trying a lot of different causes of action, a lot of different statutes to sue. But these two I wanted to raise because I think these hurt the most. So I think these unjust enrichment and product liability are the most concerning causes of action. First, unjust enrichment would likely be like a class action, where or it's better suited for class action, where product liability is probably more suited for individual action. And why these I think are so concerning is unjust enrichment has disgorgement as an equitable remedy for breach of fiduciary duty. So it's not just a regulatory thing. Unjust enrichment as a cause of action allows for disgorgement. Now, obviously, that's been used in a financial term, but the idea that the FTC has expanded the idea of disgorgement, can we move that into the civil arena? It's an open question, and if you can, that is terrifying, right? And the other thing that makes unjust enrichment concerning is that The remedy of disgorgement does not require evidence of injury. So I don't have to prove that I've been injured. That's a lot of the issue when people are bringing lawsuits. Can you prove you were injured by this algorithm? I can't prove I'm injured. I have no standing. But disgorgement doesn't require evidence of injury. I mean, depending on the statute you use, um, the underlying statute, it doesn't require evidence of injury. So that is a key differentiator with a lot of the other causes of action that people have looked at. And then secondarily, product liability is terrifying because it is strict liability, which means all I have to do is prove the defect. I don't have to prove malice or intent. Um, that is pretty terrifying if I'm prosecuting. It's great if I'm the plaintiff, but it's pretty terrifying if I'm the defendant. So there's a lot of things being thrown up against the wall, but I just want to kind of key in and get people's eyes on these two. And I also want to go back to one of the things we talked about. This slide is from the last presentation. I want to go back because this explains why this is so terrifying. Um, when your clients use an AI system and they build on top of an AI system, a core AI system, they have to agree to the terms of services of that core system. And I link here ChatGPT's terms of services. And in theirs, they say users agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless us, our affiliates, and our personnel from and against any claims, losses, and expenses, including attorney's fees, arising from or relating to your use of our services, including your content, products, or services you develop or offer in connection with our services, and your breach of either these terms or violation of applicable law. I thought you might have some thoughts on that.
I mean, it is a concern for, larger business clients who are adopting a product, giving it, you know, control to any extent or data over their business. I mean, when operations turn over, if you're not going to have any recourse, but if it fails, you could be subject to significant liability, not just for breaches of data, but somehow creating a bad product. The easiest one for me as a lawyer is to think, if I relied on one of the research tools, AI assistants, don't triple check it like a real human engaging in critical thinking, put my brief out there and commit legal malpractice because I've trusted the bot, that's a problem. And I won't have any recourse to go upward because I've already signed the terms of use, whether it's a free or paid for product.
Yeah, and then a lot of companies are, well, I don't exactly want to use ChatGPT, but I want to build on top of it for tools for my clients for my attorneys or possibly for my clients to help them do certain things. Well, if someone sues, they either sue you or they sue, OpenAI based on the tool that you built. Not only do you have to defend yourself, you have to defend OpenAI. Like that's what you've agreed to. And anyone up that chain between you and OpenAI, you may end up having to defend everyone who's helped make the products that your product now relies on.
Random
Um,
thought, should we be including them as additional insureds on business liability policies if we decide to adopt AI? I mean, we're stuck with it anyway.
I feel like that's a good conversation to have. And I think raising these issues are important because if you don't raise them, you can't start to address them, right? So let's talk a little bit about, okay, so so my client is either being sued or I am suing based on some sort of AI related harm. How do I even start this? Like, where should I look to for discovery? And so I think these are three areas that you want to start probing in your initial discovery if you are suing, and if you're defending, you want to look into these areas as risk mitigation, right? So first is going to be transparency. And we talked about this a bit last time. Like, what is your data look like? Do you have lineage? Can I say where this data came from? Are things documented? Do I have process flows so I can tell this data comes from here to there to there, right? And then what am I using to audit this system, and how often am I auditing it? What am I using to explain the decision making? What kind of method, what kind of technique am I using to explain the decision making, right? And is that suited to the kinds of use cases I'm using? Decision making, like what are the confidence intervals? Like how confident is this AI system when it's making these decisions that I'm changing people's lives on? And we discussed a bit last time about how an AI can be uber confident and dead wrong at the same time. But if it's not confident and it's wrong, that's a problem, right? And you took the decision anyway. So you need to be looking at what are the confidence intervals? Like, do I have a threshold set where if it's not to that level of confidence, I'm not going to take that decision.
Well, and
Um,
do confidence levels in general exist right now in existing AI developed tools? Like, is that offered if
it
you pay for
depends.
it?
Well, it shouldn't have to be paid for. It's how the AI like it's a fundamental thing that the AI produces. So if they're making you pay for it, that's a problem. If it isn't available, that's a problem. But if you're going to implement these tools, you need to have access to that confidence level, and you need to be putting thresholds on what level of confidence, especially if you're doing things that are impacting people's lives. How confident the AI has to be in its decision making is of critical importance.
I guess I'm
Um,
just not seeing, here's a response from ChatGPT. I'm 99% sure, this is an accurate response. That doesn't exist as far as I've seen, but we would need that tool.
Yeah. And so, but when you're using it in your company, hopefully you're not using the off the shelf free to play version, right? Like, hopefully you're paying for the bells and whistles, and this would be something you need to have access to. And then you want to know how is it, we talked a bit about error types, like is it optimized to make sure that it gets as many people in the class, and if it sucks up the wrong people, that's okay? Or is it optimized to only get who needs to be in the class, and if it leaves out some people, that's okay? Like those are two very different approaches, and your AI is going to optimize for one of those approaches, and you need to make sure that it's optimizing for the right approach for your use case. Um, then we talked about accuracy, like the AI as an overarching thing can be accurate for the error type that you've asked for, but you need to look into how individual groups are treated because it may be wildly inaccurate for certain types of people, and you need to consider that because if it's wildly inaccurate for protected groups, that may be problematic for you going forward, right? Um, and then reliability and reproducibility, right? Like how reliable is the decision making that's coming out of your AI system? Can it reproduce like its same decision making over and over? If it's changing the decision every single time, then is this something you can say is truly reliable and that you should have allowed to make decisions about people's lives? And then I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And you've talked about how AI has been very successful in like back office procedures on manufacturing. But as we're getting inundated with sales of different AI products, and so are our clients, I'm just wondering how they're going to know that reproducibility matters, that reliability matters. We don't have the nomenclature widely available. I don't want my clients relying on the salesperson to, be able to make these determinations. There's just a lot going on that we need to think about, and they
Yeah.
need to be aware of that they may not.
Yeah, I think, part of what we said or one of the things we put in the blurb for this session was that AI is going to change the way that you interact with your clients. You're going to need to provide a different kind of service to them around AI. Like reviewing the contract in and of itself is no longer going to be sufficient. This is not like a normal vendor. Like there are things that you're going to need to understand and point out to your clients in order to make sure that you're giving them good legal service. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those things in the next slide. Let me just finish up with the human
Sure.
oversight process. So, a data steward is a person who basically is responsible for ensuring quality of data within a particular area, and then ensuring that the data goes where it's supposed to go and only where it's supposed to go. Do those people even exist in your company? This
Do
question
they
comes up.
exist in this country?
So,
Who
like,
are these
if those,
people?
right? Like, those are the people who are going to help you make sure that your AI is not getting personally. or sensitive data or HIPAA data or things that it shouldn't have access to, right? Those are the people who are going to help you make sure that you have this data lineage that you need. Like, does this function exist at the job where they're implementing AI? That is something you should probe. We talked about human in the loop and human, I said human on the loop. There's it's the idea that humans are overseeing the process in some way. But you need to be probing into how much agency do these humans have? Like, are they rubber stamping? Like, do they really have an opportunity to understand how the decision is being made and then make a reasoned decision on do I want to move forward with this or not? And then how much, what is their autonomy? Like, can they stop an algorithm from getting out? Can they, what is their level of, I guess, authority, right? To say, no, these last five answers were not good. I'm not going to allow those to be used. Like, do they actually have that kind of agency and autonomy? And then finally, what is the redress process, right? Because that's not going to be a purely technical process. That's a human led process. Is there a process to for someone to say, hey, this data is wrong, can you fix it? Or hey, this decision was wrong, can you fix it? So those are areas to probe and also areas to consider for mitigation. But let's talk a little bit more about some other technical mitigations. Um, and Starlett, keep me honest. I get into the weeds here. So
If I
so
don't understand, I'm going to jump up and yell.
thank you. So there are some basic things that need to be done from a technical point of view to mitigate risk. If you're defending clients, you should advise your clients about these areas of concern. If you're a plaintiff, if you're suing, these are particular areas for you to explore once again. Data lineage is a core requirement for AI pipelines. You need to know what is being fed into this AI. And so data lineage is basically a structure that explains it's a process, it's a platform that says this data came from this source and went to this source and went to this source, was split, half went here, half went there. This was the math that was calculated on it. It ended up here, right? You have that on your AI pipelines if you want to protect your clients. And if someone doesn't have that, that's something you want to probe into.
And we're
Um,
talking a lot about like PII, PHI. I'm imagining the electronic health record storing medical information at hospital facilities. Like if you're going to put that information in, what it has to be protected under law has to be treated differently, and you've got to know what path it followed. That's what you're saying, right?
right. So that gets into part two, right?
Okay.
So I'm saying as a general rule, just know where all your data is going. Like
Okay.
that's just step one. Step two is what you're talking about for we call it PII, which is personally identifiable. Anything that can tell me who you are as an individual, like your username, your email, any of that kind of information, or sensitive data from which I can infer who you are. Um, any data like that needs to have its pipeline specifically like tagged and marked. In the data world, we call that schemas. We use schemas. It's a format for different types of data. So you need to be intentional with creating and using schemas around these sensitive data pipelines so that it's easy for me to see from a backend developer, oh, this is not a normal kind of data. This is a special kind of data. I probably don't want to put it into this AI pipeline, right? Or if I do, I need to have some significant documentation to explain why it's being used, how it's being used, and the flow charts of those pipelines, right? Um, and then just as a general rule, only use heavily documented pipelines for your key models. Like the AI model that if it goes offline, your business dies, it has to have all the documentation. And then you can, work everything else from them. But that is your number one priority. The ones that are keeping your business afloat need to be heavily documented. So if they weren't before, jump on it now, priority rank them, and make sure that you document these pipelines because you know, data scientists have a different goal than lawyers, right? Like lawyers are trying to protect the company, data scientists are trying to build products. And so if I'm, going through and I'm testing my model and I see, oh, well, that pipeline gives me a lot more accurate responses, I want to use that pipeline. Well,
So, sorry, go ahead.
if that pipeline isn't documented and it has like some information, some data that shouldn't get out to the public or shouldn't be used in these pipelines, that there's no way for that developer to know it. They're just choosing based on what works best for my model. So you need to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I just spun out on disaster recovery plans for companies that have like SOC 1, SOC 2 technical requirements for their customers' data. I mean, I feel like even the development of a disaster recovery plan, to the extent a lawyer is helping guide that process for a business client. And then you look at things like cyber attacks, which we haven't discussed here, and we don't even really know what they look like in an AI tool setting. We don't know how to put the measures in place or help clients do it. I don't think at this point. I don't know what a proper disaster recovery program is going to look like once you develop these tools. And we can't always trust the makers of the AI tools to come up with that. That's usually done in tandem with several different professionals because we do have to have our business back up and running, in 12 hours, 24 hours, different criteria, especially when people's lives or court deadlines or whatever it is on the line. You can't have your system break down. So it's just another flag I'll pop up. We have 3 minutes left. I don't think there's
Yeah.
going to be time for questions again, and we didn't finish.
We actually have 6 minutes left. We started a little late.
Okay.
But I would, yeah, I think you have to bring in an expert. I'm putting these out there because this is like an introduction of the kinds of things that are not on our radar as attorneys that we now need to put on our radar because we need to tell our clients about these issues. But at some point, you have to bring in an expert. Like there's only so much you're gonna know, and there's only so much you can do. You've got to bring people in to help you figure this out, and that would be one of your consulting parts of your business, right? Consult your clients that you need an expert to come help you with disaster mitigation and risk mitigation. The last thing I was going to say was use the most explainable model. Black box opaque models are not necessarily more accurate than explainable models. So try to use the most explainable model possible that meets your use case.
And
And
in
then finally,
case nobody knows what that means, like when you're picking the AI tool, and which algorithms are going to be used for your business's AI system, you can have something where no one will ever see into the algorithms, they're black box, or it could be seen and dissected and understood and explained. And
yes,
there's
and
different levels of explainability.
yes. And you want to default the things that can be explained as much as possible. And then you want to choose the level of explainability that best suits your use case. Like get as explainable as you can for what you need to do. And then finally, document everything. We're lawyers. We know that. Document everything. Um, I think we might have time for one or two questions.
Any questions, thoughts, concerns? No? Well, I just want to go back to guiding business clients, for me anyway. When I'm reviewing contracts for, their implementation of other systems, other purchase programs, I'm comfortable doing that. I know how those programs work. When I don't know how an AI system that is being sold to a client works, I don't think that it is that I maybe have the competency and I need to make the disclosures to that client. Here are some things I'm aware of that you need to have a neutral expert come in and counsel you on, and probably pay them to consult and create whatever the next steps are as you and after you implement this thing that you're buying. Yes, it can be great and revolutionize the industry, but we have to be careful and know what we don't know as attorneys at a minimum.
Well said. I think we'll wrap up with that.
All right. Thanks everyone for being here. Masheika, wonderful to see you as always. I'll talk to a lot of you soon. Have a great rest of your day.